In this video, you will understand why you keep doing the very thing you told yourself you would stop doing, that habit you swore you would abandon, yet somehow always return to. Today, you will understand, and from this point forward, you will know what to do to break this cycle. Let us begin quietly with your own experience. There was a moment, not long ago, when you saw clearly. You recognized a pattern in your life that could not continue. Perhaps it was a habit that consumes your time. Perhaps something that weakens your focus. Perhaps something you feel slightly ashamed of, though you rarely say it out loud. And in that moment, your thinking was sharp. You said to yourself, "This ends now." And you believed it, not emotionally, but with a kind of internal certainty. But then something happened. Not immediately, not dramatically, something subtle. The intensity of that decision began to fade, not because you changed your mind consciously, but because your mental state shifted. And as it shifted, your behavior followed. Until one day, almost without noticing the transition, you found yourself doing the very thing you had rejected again. And at that point, a second experience appears, not the action itself, but the interpretation. You say, "I lack discipline. I always fall back. There is something wrong with me." But let us pause here, because this interpretation is where the confusion begins. You are not observing a moral failure. You are observing a movement between mental states. And unless you understand that movement, you will continue to mislabel the result. The Hermetic teaching expresses this with a simple statement: everything is dual. Everything has poles. This is not an abstract idea. It is something you are experiencing daily. Consider this carefully. When you decide to abandon a habit, you are not destroying it. You are positioning yourself at one end of a mental scale, a pole of resistance, a pole of clarity, a pole of tension directed toward change. But that pole is not isolated. It exists in relation to its opposite: indulgence, comfort, familiar repetition. And here is the crucial point. Your mind does not remain fixed at one pole simply because you chose it once. It moves, gradually, continuously, often without your awareness. Atkinson emphasized that mental states are not permanent structures, but conditions that shift by degree, influenced by attention and repetition. So what you experience is not a sudden collapse. It is a gradual drift. At first, the shift is almost invisible. A small thought appears, just this once. Not a command, a suggestion, then another. It's not that serious. Then a subtle relaxation of attention. You stop actively holding the position you once established. And at that moment, the movement begins. You do not fall. You slide. And by the time the behavior returns, the movement has already been completed. The action is not the beginning. It is the end of a process you did not observe. Now let us look at anxiety, because this is where many people become confused. They believe anxiety is caused by the habit itself, but that is not entirely accurate. Anxiety emerges in the space between poles, when two opposing tendencies are active at once. One part of you continues the behavior. Another part resists it, and you feel this as tension. Have you noticed this sensation? That quiet discomfort while you are repeating the very thing you said you would stop. That is not random emotion. It is the awareness of contradiction. One direction says, "Continue." Another says, "This must end." And you are held between them. This is polarity experienced internally, not as theory, but as conflict. And here is where most people take the wrong approach. They attempt to eliminate one side completely. They say, "I must destroy this desire." But polarity does not work that way. You cannot erase one pole of a mental condition. You can only change your position along the scale. This is what the Hermetic teachings describe as mental transmutation. not suppression, not denial, but deliberate shifting. If this perspective is helping you think more clearly about your own mind, subscribe. These ideas deepen over time. So what does this mean in practice? It means your effort must become more precise, not stronger, more precise. Most people focus on the moment of action. They try to stop themselves at the final stage. But by then, the movement is already complete. Your influence exists earlier, at the level of direction, at the level of attention, at the level of small internal permissions. You must begin to observe the beginning of the shift, the first thought that weakens your position, the first moment you stop actively holding your chosen direction. Atkinson placed great emphasis on the training of attention as the foundation of mental control, because attention determines direction, and direction determines outcome. So when the shift begins, you do not panic. You do not condemn yourself. You notice, quietly, precisely, and then you act, not externally, but internally. You redirect your thought. You reestablish your position. You bring your attention back to the pole you have chosen, not once, but repeatedly. This is not dramatic work. It will not feel powerful at first. It will feel almost insignificant. But over time, something changes, not because the opposite pole disappears, but because your habitual position shifts. You begin to spend more time in clarity, less time in contradiction, not by force, but by familiarity. And slowly, the anxiety changes as well, because the division within you begins to reduce. Not completely, but noticeably. You are no longer pulled as strongly in opposite directions, because you are no longer drifting unconsciously. So the next time you find yourself returning to an old pattern, do not begin with judgment. Begin with observation. Ask yourself, when did the movement begin? Not the action, the movement, because that is where your influence exists, not at the end of the process, but at its origin. Most people attempt to control behavior. Few ever study the direction of their own thought, and fewer still recognize that what they call failure is often nothing more than an unobserved shift along a mental scale. You are not repeating the same mistake. You are repeating the same movement. And until you learn to see that movement clearly, you will continue to believe that the problem is your lack of strength, when in truth, it is your lack of observation. Most people attempt to fight themselves. Few ever learn to understand the structure of the mind they are trying to control.